So what exactly can be said about Resident Evil 3's remake for PlayStation 4 Pro that hasn't already been said? Very little, in my opinion. I would say the reviewer on YouTube, Angry Joe, was pretty accurate in his depiction and review for Resident Evil 3. It has a great story. I'll give it that. Great story, still wonderful and amazing visuals. The horror aesthetics in the visuals are top-notch. They're perfect. The character animations, the models, everything in the environment is so well polished. Even Easter eggs pertaining to the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis release, it all blends and meshes well together visually and narratively. The problems I have with Resident Evil 3 is I believe it was really, really overhyped because of Resident Evil 2's remake's release, and that was a part of why it's suffering as its own individual remake. Resident Evil 3 is basically Resident Evil 2 with all of the good stuff that was in Resident Evil 2 completely stripped away. The horror theme in the gameplay is non-existent. The big bad Nemesis, he's not really all that terrible. He's not scary. It's an action game. That's honestly what it is. It's Resident Evil 6 with more horror aesthetics visually. Now, with that being said, I need to say, I understand Resident Evil 3 was always the start of the actioneer in the Resident Evil series, but and I know Resident Evil 6 was definitely the lowest part of the series, with it being nothing but violence. But Resident Evil 3 Remake, I personally was too young to play Resident Evil 3 when it released. I wasn't allowed. Yes, I know, funny. Anyway, the remake, though, on its own, it's not a terrible game. It's actually a really well-made game. The problems in Resident Evil 3, the remake, are basically just in the gameplay. There are some maps where there are horror aesthetics all throughout the environment, like in the entire hospital location. The horror is phenomenally top-notch. Okay, you have to go in, search it. It kind of reminded me of the end of The Last of Us. It honestly did. The problem, though, is the action portion of the game. They stray way, way too far away from the horror survival aesthetics, and they implement mostly just action into this game. Again, this isn't a terribly made game. This is a good game. It has a great story, great characters. Jill and Carlos, they are really great characters. Carlos's mop top is really annoying, but hey, honestly, it actually kind of fits with the current situation in the real world. He kind of looks like he's been in quarantine lockdown for months without a haircut. But anyway, regardless of that, so the story is phenomenal. The characters are great. They are likable. Visuals, amazing, outstanding, top-notch. The story, I will have to say, because they stripped a lot of environments out from the original, and they basically tweaked it from stripping all of these environments that were in the original, putting in kind of copy-paste environments, and also adding in a couple boss fights with Nemesis, and the boss fights are ridiculously absurd. They're stupid. They're dumb. They are not even fun. Once you figure out what you have to do, you do the boss fight in 2 minutes, and then you win. And then you continue with exploration. And honestly, the boss fights are terrible, and with them stripping so many environments out of the world, it feels like such a linear game compared to Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 3 is basically a corridor action shooter. That's pretty much what it is. There's some backtracking, but it's never necessary. And not to mention the playtime. I beat this game in 3 to 3.5 hours. It's not a long game at all. And I personally don't like games that focus on the length of a game stemming from the difficulty. Okay? It should be, at the very least, a 7 to 8 hour game, even on the easiest difficulty. Hands down. And honestly, like I said earlier, if they hadn't have stripped a lot of the environments from the original from this game, I feel it could have at least been a 5-hour playtime game. So with that being said, great story, albeit short, really short. Terrible nemesis system, terrible boss fights, great characters, great visuals. That's really all there is to it. Compared to Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis Remake is not terrible, but it's pretty mediocre. And I'm going to have to give Resident Evil 3 Remake a 6 out of 10. Oh, and the online portion of it, it's not even worth noting, but I'm going to note it anyway. It's not good. It's buggy, the camera is wonky everywhere, which the camera is tolerable in the main story because of how narrow the environments are, but online it's ridiculous. So yeah, as it stands, my score, Resident Evil 3, 6 out of 10. Thank you.